hair-raising roar of a lion stopped me in my tracks. It came from just around the bend, less than a stone's throw from where I stood with my family on a shady path. It took several moments before I mustered the courage to walk on, certain that I was about to come face to jowl with a fierce, hungry wildcat. Instead, we turned the corner and found the very high, very sturdy chain-link fence that separated us from those ferocious felines. I was 17 at the time. My family and I were exploring the San Diego Wild Animal Park, and I still remember that moment of terror when I couldn't see the fence between me and that lion. Sometimes boundaries are a really good thing. Buoys in the water tell us where it's safe to swim and where it's not. Traffic laws keep us safe. Stay on the right side of the road, not the left. Go this fast and no faster. In the United States, our Bill of Rights sets boundaries around political power. We will not discriminate on the basis of race or gender at the ballot box. We will not encroach on a person's free speech or privacy. Professional boundaries protect against sexual harassment and abuse. And the brave women of the #MeToo movement have recently reminded us just how important it is to define and to maintain clear, healthy interpersonal boundaries. In the early chapters of the Bible, God establishes all kinds of boundaries. In the book of Job, for example, God tells the ocean, "Thus far shall you come and no farther. Here shall your proud waves be stopped." And in the book of Leviticus, which is part of the Torah, or God's law for the Israelites, the people are told not to mix things that are different. "You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your animals breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you put on a garment made of two different materials." Now, those particular laws, though they sound arcane to us, helped define the Israelite community and set them apart from the non-Israelites. This is who we are. We are God's people. And we might find it odd, but if you're a Yankees fan, you definitely don't wear red when they play the Red Sox. And if you grew up in the United States, you probably eat turkey for Thanksgiving and not codfish. Boundaries help us to know who we are and who we're not. Even our brain has a boundary, that corpus callosum, which bridges the dramatically different but interdependent spheres, the left and the right hemispheres. In her now famous TED Talk, My Stroke of Insight, neuroanatomist Jill Bolte Taylor, anybody heard this TED Talk, My Stroke of Insight? Jill Bolte Taylor describes what happened when she suffered from a stroke. How she slowly lost track of herself and experienced a profound sense of oneness with her surroundings, with the whole universe. It turns out the left side of the brain thinks like an individual, makes me aware that I am me and not you. When Dr. Bolte Taylor's left hemisphere shut down during that stroke, she watched that boundary deteriorate. She said it was amazing. The feeling of merging with the universe. But she also knew that she couldn't function without the hemisphere that drew dividing lines between her and everything else. Some boundaries are necessary. They protect us, define us, help us to thrive. Then there are those other boundaries. The ones put in place to keep people out or to keep people down. The rules, written or unwritten, designed to consolidate power in the hands of some and deny it to others. Apartheid, segregated education, the practice of redlining, which kept generations of African Americans from buying homes in white neighborhoods. These are all examples of institutionalized discrimination, destructive lines drawn in the sand. And sometimes the lines we draw are more subtle, although no less damaging. So we become accustomed to living in one kind of neighborhood, or hanging out with one group of people, or worshiping in one particular way. We get used to hanging out with friends who sport tattoos and piercings, or not. With people who play golf in collared shirts, or not. Some of us do all of our communicating by text message. Some still send handwritten notes. You could call it habit. A habit is a behavior that bypasses the frontal cortex. The first time I choose my route home, I have to think about it, when to turn left, when to turn right. But once I've settled into a routine, I can no longer make a decision, don't need to. So I skip right over the part of the brain that actively evaluates. We can develop habits of trust or distrust, of inclusion or of exclusion, almost without realizing it. We make subtle choices about whom we invite and whom we leave out of our lives. We draw lines in the sand and in our brains. When this happens, consciously or unconsciously, or a little bit of both, we settle into routines that can divide or diminish. And then it may be time not to defend the boundaries, but to cross them. You see, that same God who drew a line in the sand to stop the sea, the God who told the Israelites that some food was to be considered clean and other food unclean, that's the same God who sent Jesus to hang out with the outcasts. The people labeled as unclean or unwelcome, who lived at the boundaries of acceptable society. And it's the same God who brought a Roman soldier named Cornelius together with a Jewish follower of Jesus named Peter in a headline encounter that flew in the face of cultural and religious norms. Imagine how Peter must have felt as he crossed that threshold into Cornelius' house, or how Cornelius must have felt inviting him. His whole life, Peter had been taught that faithfulness to God meant maintaining a kosher home, avoiding foreigners, eating only certain foods, sitting only with the people on the approved invitation list. And now he was walking into the home of a stranger, a Gentile, and a Roman soldier at that. It reminds me a little of young Ruby Sales, walking to the all-white school on that first day of enforced integration. A small brown girl in pigtails, clutching her books as she walked the gauntlet of jeering adults. How her heart must have been pounding in her chest. It reminds me also of Jean Robinson, the first gay priest to be elected bishop in the Episcopal Church, after being raised in a faith tradition that too often labeled gay men and lesbian women as irredeemably unclean in the eyes of God. Did you know? At the urging of others, Reverend Robinson wore a bulletproof vest under his vestments on the day he was consecrated as bishop. Boundary crossing requires courage, maybe even a complete rewiring of our brains. It can be like swimming across those ropes into open water or learning to drive on the other side of the road. It can be disconcerting at best, terrifying at worst. At first, it may feel all wrong, like trying to sign your name with your non-dominant hand. Of course, Peter received a warmer welcome than Ruby. And his first worship service in Cornelia's home may have been less fraught than Reverend Robinson's service of consecration, but I can only imagine the trepidation Peter must have felt, crossing that line that had never before been crossed, at the urging of a God whom Peter had known as the one who sets the boundaries. What happened? Did God change? Did we? I think it's possible that Jesus' task, by design, his showing up, was all about mixing things up, unsettling the people around him, to upend routines long established, just long enough for them and for us to see the world and God and each other with fresh eyes. After his resurrection, Christ made it clear to his followers that they were supposed to carry on, to spread the good news of God's love all over the place. I won't be there, he told them, but I'll send another in my place. Enter the Holy Spirit, who breezes in and interrupts Peter's sermon. Skip to the end, Peter. Just welcome them in. Whether you know it or not, they are already part of the team. Beloved in Christ, I kind of think this is the whole enchilada. The Great Commission, the raison d'etre, for all those apostles let loose in the world by Jesus, and for all of us. Go and cross some boundaries, Jesus said. Here's how you do it, God said. Let me stir things up, the Holy Spirit said. Let me remind you that those folks on the other side of the boundary, they belong to God too. And they are just as likely to be blessed by God's Spirit, just as likely to have gifts to share and wisdom to impart. They and you have this in common. No matter how many differences seem to keep you apart, we can all be Spirit-filled. All these generations later, we are still learning how to cross boundaries, still figuring out how to rewire our brains. Establishing new habits takes practice, repetition. It means choosing to turn left when you're used to turning right. It means saying hello when you'd rather walk away. It means crossing into unfamiliar terrain, walking around that corner again and again, despite a fear of the unknown that threatens to stop us in our tracks. And so we travel to Puerto Rico to learn from our cousins on that faraway island, to learn or to remember what it means to live on the edge every day, without a regular source of clean water or consistent electricity, to meet the Holy Spirit in those who are working to build a community, rebuild a community from scratch. And we travel to Bridgeport to spend time with our partners at St. Matthew's Baptist Church, to hear what it's like from our African American sisters and brothers to navigate the visible and invisible lines drawn by institutional racism, to learn how the Holy Spirit sustains and upholds those of you who have known that struggle firsthand every day. Beloved in Christ, this is our vocation as Christians: to cross the room, to defend someone who is being bullied, to cross town, to protest an unjust law, to cross the aisle, to discover how God's Spirit is moving in another person's life. We cross over because we need one another, because we belong to each other, because this whole salvation thing isn't a left brain endeavor. It's not about me saving my own skin. It's about us saving us all, God's whole blessed creation. It's about discovering more beauty, more joy, more healing, more hope, more courage, more connection when we sit together at one table. It is about becoming less divided and closer to whole. May it be so. Thanks be to God. Amen.